Everything's falling apart around me. Can you all hear me all right? Yes? Okay, good. We'll see how long it takes for anyone else to start doing a demo or something, and I'll be competing with them, but hopefully it won't take much time. And hopefully I can also stand and walk around without feedback. Good. So I'm hoping to do this little session here a little bit differently than I might normally. When I speak on stage a lot at various things, for sometimes for photography, a lot of the time over the last 10 years for design, and most of the time it's kind of fairly scripted from end to end. But I figured since this is a small area and there might be a lot more opportunity to have kind of a conversation, what I'm going to do is kind of start talking through some things, but I'd happily kind of dig into essentially Q&A or back and forth and make more of the talk. If there are any questions or thoughts around the topic that any of you have, interject them. You won't be interrupting me, basically. So I'm giving you that permission to start with. So I'm going to assume as well that no one knows who I am, because there's no reason anyone should. But one of the ways that I think of myself a lot when it comes to photography is that I have far too many cameras. I'm a designer by trade. I have been for over 20 years, and a lot of that time has been spent thinking about and working in product design. And it's that actually finally brought me to photography about 8 years ago, because I was interested in cameras themselves. That's what that kind of sparked my interest. I'd always been around cameras. My dad always had a camera around, and I had digital cameras that I played with when they were new, and I'm sure I had point and shoots when I was in my teens and shooting film, but it never captured me for some reason, even though I was doing art and design and lots of other visual things. So the best illustration of the way I see myself when it comes to that side of it is, oh, and this might just not even work. That would be great. I'm just going to stand here and do this. Actually, even nothing's working now. Apparently my whole computer has decided to just not function this morning. That's wonderful. Let's do that again. Oh, good Lord. You know, there's always, I kind of like to say that it's not a proper presentation unless there are technical difficulties. You would think, though, that, here we go. All right, so this is a good illustration, I think, of I have so many cameras now that I'm even being asked to do things because of how many cameras I have. But this is one of the things I'm most passionate about, is that this idea of photography being one thing and one format, one method of expression. That works for some people, but for me, that's too restrictive. I'm actually interested, because I'm interested in the cameras, that led to me being interested in different formats, whether it was digital or film. And then, of course, once you dig into film, it's not just one format of film. And it happened to be that the very first format of film and the camera that introduced me to photography as something that I finally realized was something I wanted to do, that I also had maybe some sort of ability at, was the Polaroid SX70 over there. And I love cameras. I love film cameras. I have a problem with them, but we'll get into that in a few minutes, because part of the title of this kind of is, the long title of the talk includes the age of Instagram. And what does that even mean? It's like it's an ice age or something. We're not going to be referring in 2,000 years to the Instagram age, but right now in the world of photography, it's kind of the flag bearer for the digital movement, because it's made everything so much easier, like getting images out to a wide audience, so much easier than anything that came before. And it's exploded in such a short period of time that it's made everyone pay attention if they might not have been paying attention to the digital world beforehand. And because it's not a camera, even though it lives on a device that does have a camera in it, and I mean, even if you don't shoot digitally, how many of you shoot film only? I'm curious. Just one. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Do you have a smartphone? Okay, so even though you don't shoot digital, you have a digital camera with you all the time now, and that's, well, but you know, this is what I find interesting about the age we live in right now. And again, calling it the age of Instagram, it doesn't really matter. It's the point that there's a certain accessibility to photography that's happening now that has never happened before, and it's not just an accessibility to the camera and to the act of shooting, but the idea that even if you don't use that, you can actually still easily share anything you shoot, no matter what it was shot on, with a worldwide audience, which again is not something, even though the web's been around, the ease of that sharing is kind of brand new by comparison. It's a very, very small sliver. So Instagram launched in October of 2010. It's 5 years old already, which in digital terms is a long time. In photographic terms, it's not, but a lot has happened in those 5 years. I was using it. I was lucky enough to be one of the very first beta testers of Instagram. So I was using it from about August of that year, a few months before it was released publicly. And at this point, I run a couple of I have two different accounts. I've got my main account, and sometime last year, almost a year ago, I decided to create a different account as an experiment, which we won't get into, but it was kind of, I've got a massive, kind of a silly audience. I don't think about the size of that number on my main account there. It's like 745,000 people, which doesn't necessarily mean people who are looking at everything I post all the time, but somehow that number has reached a kind of ridiculous level. And I don't like it because it makes me uncomfortable, because I try to share things that I like, not that an audience likes. And because I do a lot of commercial work now, and some of it bleeds over into Instagram, sometimes I'm posting things for clients to what was my personal space. So I've got a second account that's just my own work, and it also is a lot of film work. Until November of last year, which we'll talk a little bit more about here, until November of last year, I was only shooting or posting smartphone photos, specifically like 99% iPhone, to my Instagram account. So even though I shoot all these different formats, Instagram for me was an interesting experiment in constraint, almost the opposite of the way I treat the rest of my camera collection and every other thing that I shoot. And it was good because of that, because it was forcing me to use one type of camera and one format, a lot of technical restrictions with a small plastic lens on a small sensor as well, and I enjoyed that. But it's the thought process around the how you treat this digital age, I think, and how you treat different formats, and the importance of embracing a lot of different formats that excites me. This stuff isn't actually important. I can skip over this. This was just kind of a who I am. I've been very lucky now that in the last few years, since moving from the States and throwing myself into photography, I've actually been able to make a fairly decent commercial push into it. It's not what I want to do full time, because the more you take money from people, the less creative control you get. And as a designer for most of my life, I'm very aware of that. But it's also nice to be able to kind of get that recognition from a commercial point of view. And when I shoot commercially, I'm always trying to shoot multiple formats whenever I can, whether or not the client asks for that. Because I find that one of the things that has happened over the last 8 years of actually recognizing photography as part of my daily routine, the more I shoot with, the more I understand what I'm seeing. So I started out shooting Polaroid film. It was right before everything was discontinued, before the integral film was discontinued. And that film, as well as the instant feedback, so the look of it, the feel of it, the experience of watching it develop, was what I think properly captured me. And that informed my move from there to digital. And then when I started shooting with an iPhone, which was shortly before I actually got my hands on Instagram, that instant photography still informed that a little bit. And I'd already been shooting on larger format, on medium format at that point, and some 4x5 at that point. And all of that informed everything that I saw through this. And as a designer, I'm always kind of reflecting on every decision that I make. Everything that I try is kind of a little bit of an experiment where I'm the test subject. And what I've realized is that picking up a different camera changes your point of view. The difference in the physicality, which as a product designer I'm very, very familiar with, but it's still kind of interesting to feel that, is that even if you're shooting in the same format, you switch to a camera that functions differently and feels differently in your hand, and you behave slightly differently. Then you have other technical differences, of course, like the lenses. If the optics are different, the result is going to be a little bit different. You switch film emulsions, you're going to get a different result. Every one of those little decisions, whether if you overexpose versus underexpose, you're getting, and if you shoot film or if you shoot digital, we know this, but I think it can be too easy to forget how much of an impact each of those different onion skins makes once you stack enough of them up. And so I like kind of changing things. So this is my first photo on Instagram. It's very, very Instagram-y, because it is kind of a look that everyone got used to, and why a lot of people kind of pushed back at it. A lot of photographers pushed back at it because it's a picture on a cell phone with a filter put on top of it. That's really all it is. I mean, some composition, you hope, but it's almost too easy, right? And yet, because I was just playing with it, I'd been shooting about 3 years at that point, nothing commercial, all for myself, kind of exploring lots of different film and digital formats, incorporating some of that work into my design work when I could. But what I was interested in with this was that because I wasn't shooting commercially, I wasn't shooting every day, I wasn't even shooting every week. I was busy with a lot of different things. I had a music career almost, I had my design career and my agency that I ran. I was doing lots of different things, and even when this came up, I'd already started living half in the US and half in the UK. So I was traveling too much. I didn't have enough time to think about photography as much as I wanted to. So being able to shoot with the camera that I always had with me was a good thing for me, even though I didn't care about the quality, I didn't care about any of those other things that I would care about with any of my other cameras. What I cared about was that it gave me an excuse to see as a photographer every day without being frustrated that I didn't have the camera with me. Because I was already looking at everything like a photographer then. I saw pictures everywhere, but I didn't have a camera with me. And since then, because I threw myself at it, much like I threw myself at instant photography, and this is the kind of pattern that I like, is that shooting all these multiple formats, embracing them. The next couple of pictures here are all shot on iPhones. And so I've shot everything from portraits to landscapes, some street photography and travel photography, and even red carpet stuff, all on iPhones, alongside when I'm shooting other things. But the reason I've done it is not because someone asked me to specifically. It wasn't like the brief. A lot of these things, I've also had, a lot of these images, these shoots, except for this one, I've always had other cameras with me. But because I've seen this as a serious tool, it's opened up different types of work for me. And not just different types of commercial work, but I mean, it allows me to shoot things that I couldn't necessarily shoot with other cameras. And this isn't a talk about an iPhone or about Instagram. So the point there is that the learning from that over the last handful of years folds back into everything that I shoot on film formats and on other digital formats, is that the idea is that there is no such thing as the best camera. There is such a thing, perhaps, as the best camera for the job, or the right camera for a particular job. But even for me, a lot of the time, I have like in my case here, in my backpack, I've got 4 different cameras of different formats, because that's what I love. That's what excites me about photography, is the cameras. But I've got a Polaroid 180, because Fuji's discontinued their last packed film, and I desperately want to keep shooting it. So damn it, I'm going to keep shooting it everywhere. I've got a Leica, and I've got a Sony A7 in there as well, and my iPhone. And back in my room, I have an SX70. And a lot of my projects that I go on, whether they're personal or commercial, follow suit. I have a lot of cameras with me. Don't always use them, but what I love is that by having them, I'm seeing more opportunities for images than just the camera I have in my hand. And there are times where you could argue that might be distracting. And there are times where I think it is. And I keep questioning whether it's right or wrong. But what I've found is that I think it makes me think more broadly. And I mean, this is, again, I don't know what happened there. I said I have too many cameras. I love the SX70. It's the most fantastic thing. This one was my first one, and I've become a little bit of an SX70 rescue artist. Most of these other ones need repair and everything else. I just love these things, and this is kind of what it fuels my addiction to photography. I like getting. How many of you get a certain amount of your income? Not necessarily all of it, but how many of you have been paid for photographic work? Couple of hands, right? If you love photography and then at some point you get paid for it, it somehow feels a little bit like cheating, doesn't it? Someone has just paid you for something that you probably would have done for nothing. I know I felt that with music, I felt that with design, whenever you get paid for that, but I do it for the love of it. These are some of my early Polaroids that I shot, and prior to this, if I showed you any of the pictures that I'd shot, this is within the first 6 months of having an SX70, and prior to that moment, not not having liked anything that came out of any camera that I had, and considering photography to be a dark art. And it was the camera that, because I fell in love with the camera, and I just started shooting it because I thought, well, the film's not going to be around anymore. I'll just buy as many packs as I can find and I'll shoot it. I suddenly treated photography differently than I had before. And what I found is that by doing that, by picking up new cameras when I get, this is my first shot on Impossible film, by the way. This was December of 2010. This was the Silver Shade film, which was mostly shit, if I'm completely honest. Yeah, I know, this was the first shot I took on the first pack that I had. The other 7 shots were completely useless, right? But this is yet another thing. I wanted to try and support Impossible. I didn't have high hopes for it. I could have been very disappointed that the entire pack, except for this, was miserable, right? Whether it was me or the film, who knows? It was probably the film. Most of the time I would say it was me, but in that case it was probably the film. But this is one of my favorite shots that I've ever taken, and it has continued to make me continue to support what they're doing because it excites me, and because every time that I shoot instant film, I learn something different that I don't learn when I'm shooting on an iPhone or on a Sony A7 or on 4x5 or on anything else. And that's what I find I learn no matter what. I've pulled out some of my first shots because I think it's one thing to be able to show things that you've shot after you've had lots of experience with something. But one of the things that I focus on a lot as a designer in my design career is the idea of usability. Doing tests with people to see how, when they have no prior knowledge, how easy is something for them to use and what can they get out of it? How much can they achieve from zero? And so when I'm evaluating my own experiences with a camera and how I'm learning as a photographer, when I pick up a new camera or I use a new film stock, I want to know how good a fit this is to me right away. Because if it's a really good fit, if I get results that I'm very, very happy with, then that's showing me that I need to spend more time with it because there's more that I can learn there. So this was the first portrait that I shot on 4.5 or 5.4 for English people. I will never get that right. I'm always going to say 8.10 instead of 10.8 and then convert. Last year, I decided that I really wanted to shoot the Impossible Project 10.8 film. So I found a Polaroid image processor. That was my restriction. If I couldn't find one of those that was in working condition, I wouldn't buy an 810 camera. Well, a week later, I found one, so I went, all right, so I bought myself a Toyo 810, which calls itself a field camera, and I would never want to lug that anywhere without a mule. But the first image that I shot of that, as a test, might not be my best image or anything perfect, but I just fell in love with it immediately because there's something about the process and the film and everything else. And now I'm planning a big for me, portrait project this summer where I'm going to be shooting in Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden in the midnight sun on 10.8 sheet film. But I'm also going to be shooting it on a Sony A7R II, side by side, shooting high-res digital and high-res film. And that has become part of the pitch. And it's an interesting thing that my love for all of these different cameras, and that there's not one camera or one film type that I feel is the one that makes me forget all of the others. And being insistent on always shooting multiple formats, even on client projects, when someone looks at me, it's amazing when you show up to do a client shoot and they're expecting you to shoot digital, and I've got a couple of digital packs, but then I pull out a Polaroid. They're kind of perplexed at first, but then they kind of fall in love with it. But when it's a 35 millimeter, like a Nikon F100 that just looks like a digital camera, and I take some pictures and the client kind of comes over wanting to look at the back of it to see, and I go, no, this is film. They're like, why are you shooting this? You've got your digital in your other hand. Like, what are you doing? And it's because I enjoy it, but then the results are also good. And I just did I did a couple of shoots last year for, I shot for Leica at the Goodwood Revival, which is a lot of fun, great location. And they asked me to, Leica will happily loan you cameras, but they'll never pay you anything, but I was fine with it. It's fun. And I really wanted to do a shoot with their M monochrome, because the idea of a black and white digital camera just appeals to me hugely. And I'd seen lots of results from it, but I'd never shot with one. So I told them, I'll make you a deal. I'll go if you can give me a monochrome to shoot with, and I'm going to bring my M3 and shoot color film. So we're going to do the whole thing, and everything that you publish, you can publish my color and my black and white images, but the black and white will be the digital and the color will be the film, and it'll make a nice story. And of course they loved it, but the process of shooting it, like these are digital shots, and this is one of the film shots, and the end result for me is somehow more gratifying because of not treating it as digital and film. It was black and white and color. I don't treat this as a cell phone camera, a smartphone camera. I treat it as a camera. It's just a digital camera that has a different lens and a different sensor. Because those constraints are beautiful, but also when you can forget them and just understand how light works and shoot, you can get you can get a lot of fun out of it. I'm going to run through some of these quickly because this is another example of a shoot where some film, some digital out in Tuscany. When I shoot portraits, which I would love to do more of, but I've actually found that most of my portraits I end up shooting on an iPhone, because when you approach someone with this, there's no barrier between you. It's much like shooting on a TLR. So I wish I shot more with my Mamiya C330, but it's great because there's no disconnect between you and the subject. And I've shot more and more portraits over the last 5 years because of this than I have with any other camera, or I would have, because I'm too intimidated about taking a big camera out, which feels more serious to me. And so there's this idea of embracing all. Like I've run into a lot of people who've never shot film, right? Which these days is very, very common. How many of you have never shot film? Actually, here we go. One hand. All right, leave. No. You don't belong here. How many of you have never shot large format? Okay, a bunch of hands come up. More hands there. Why not? How many of you have never shot medium format? A couple of hands. Okay. The base idea here is that the more you try, the more you learn. Doesn't mean that you'll fall in love with it, but you might. Or you might learn something else. You try a different... People who've never shot black and white film, or always shoot black and white film and never shoot color, are missing out on learning something else about how light works and how their eyes, their sight, their vision can translate into an end result. I desperately want to... I've got a friend in Vienna who's shooting... he's doing like daguerreotype, and he's doing all sorts of old formats and processing, and he's doing it all himself, and he's just figuring it out and messing with chemicals. And I'm going to fly to Vienna at some point later this year, and so he can show me how. Not because I think I'm going to spend a whole lot of time doing it, but maybe I'll fall in love with it, and maybe I will. Maybe I'll just do it and add that to my repertoire of things that I now have done and know how to do. Portraits. There's something interesting about the results that I and a lot of other people I know have been able to get with something that seems non-threatening compared to shoving a big camera in someone's face. So, for instance, if you've never shot portraits before but you really want to, that can be a barrier. But if you are open to the idea of not having to shoot that subject matter with the main camera that you use and finding a different camera that's less threatening, that's a gateway for you. Forget the subject. It also affects the subject themselves, especially with portraits. But I've also done, I curated an exhibition about 3 years ago that was out in San Francisco, and it was all portraits. And quietly down in the corner, we mentioned that they were all shot on smartphone. But our opening night, we had 600 people in attendance, and most of them didn't realize that this was a smartphone-only exhibition because we didn't curate it like that. We didn't display photos. They were all shot by other people. None of them were mine or the other curator. We wanted to show that if you see the photo without knowing what it was produced on, you judge it differently. And this is a kind of truth that a lot of photographers don't acknowledge. Because if you're so familiar with the equipment that you're using, that you know, like if you shoot landscapes on 5.4 or 10.8, the idea of shooting a landscape on 35 millimeter is probably just silly to you because all you can think about is how different the optics are, how different the the size of the film is and the resolution that you're going to be able to get out of it is. Forget things like movements. Like there's just so many differences that you can't help but be aware of. So the idea of shooting it on this would just be ludicrous and laughable, except that if you do, and you were to push yourself, either whether it's 35 or an iPhone, the same as if you've only shot small formats, you might be intimidated by a larger format. But if you push yourself into that, suddenly you've broadened your own horizons. And commercially, which for some of us doesn't matter, if all you do is fine art, all you do is personal work, then you're never having anyone else judge you, and you're not trying to sell to anyone. I think that's actually a brilliant place to be. That's why I don't want to be a full-time photographer. I want to be a part-time photographer so I can always say no to things. But I'm going to keep pushing forward here because I want to have time for us to kind of discuss things. And I love this stuff too much, and because I haven't scripted this the way I normally would, it's too easy for me to ramble. So stop me rambling. I push this idea of embracing different things and different combinations further whenever I can, and not necessarily in big ways, but in ways that when I have conversations with other people, apparently they aren't doing. So a lot of commercial photographers want to use if they're shooting digital, they shoot brand new everything. I've fallen in love over the last year and a half with the Sony Alphas. I was a Canon shooter before that for digital stuff. I love the sensors on the Sonys. But what really sold me on it was the fact that you didn't have to use Sony lenses or Zeiss lenses. You could use anything. As long as you had the right adapter, you could use anything. And because I have so many cameras, I also have so many lenses. So what I started doing, I don't own a single Sony or Zeiss lens for my Sony cameras. I put old lenses on them. So I do this for commercial shoots. So I'm shooting manual focus on a brand new camera, but an old lens. So these are two portraits that I shot for a series for American Express of small businesses around the UK. And I showed up with not only was I using a manual lens from the 1960s, it was a Nikon 24 millimeter lens from the mid 1960s, which has a very particular rendering. It renders color in an interesting way. It's not coded for digital. It's like all of these things that a lot of people would say were wrong about it. But I loved the kind of look that it gives to that sensor. And then, because the brief was to not use flash or any external lighting, so I didn't know what any of the lighting was going to be in 10 different shops around the UK. Instead of shooting with my A7R II, high-res, big things, these were also going to be printed and all sorts of things, I said, well, the 12-megapixel A7S is going to be actually enough. There's no cropping room, but it's going to be enough. What I'd rather have is my high ISO performance. So I did this thing that most people probably wouldn't have done. I have a low-res digital camera with a 1960s lens to do a professional project that's going to be exhibited and displayed in lots of different places. And the fact was that the end result was something I was thrilled with and everyone else was thrilled with. And I shot in a very different way because it was manual focus the entire time. It became a topic of conversation because any of the people who were in some of these shops who knew something about a camera saw the lens and wanted to know what I was doing with this old lens. And there's kind of so there's a learning and an experience and an end result difference on the technical side of things. But there's also a different process that you go through by just experimenting. And now a lot of my digital work on the Sonys it's still kind of new because it's about approaching a year and a half that I've been shooting with those. I'm still working out the look and the feel, but because I'm only using old lenses, and sometimes I'm using Hasselblad lenses on them, which look brilliant when you have an 82.8 that's meant for medium format stuck on a tiny little mirrorless body. It just looks like a stupid thing, but the results are brilliant. And you couldn't get that with any of the modern lenses. And I'm starting to develop a look as a result of playing, much like my film photography, even though it's being output to Instagram, that was not shot on film. So more examples of a project in Iceland for Icelandic tourism. I'm shooting iPhone, A7R, and then I'm shooting film, all in the same project. All of the output is, except for the black and white, all the color output is kind of, the digital stuff is edited to look similar to the film, so it all kind of feels in keeping. And for me, I'm just kind of using every opportunity to take pictures as a chance to experiment and practice. Because I could go to any of these projects, whether they're personal or for a client, and just show up with the stuff I know will work and I can rely on, which is what a lot of people who shoot commercially do, because the feeling is you can't afford to mess up. Right? And I'm not just showing up with a film camera, because I'm still at the point where that would probably make me sweat a little bit on a one-day client shoot where there's no do-over. But the fact is that I just did a shoot up in Orkney in January for a client, and I shot with two digital bodies and 3 film bodies, which looked ridiculous. I was just walking around sometimes with some of them on everything. Most of what I delivered to the client in the end was all film. It's like maybe 3 or 4 images of my final deliverables were digital. And they don't know the difference. They don't care. They're happy with the end result. But even practicing like that is informing my next commercial projects, because until you experiment and try, you just don't know. And one of the other things that's interesting to me, and that's why I asked who was kind of getting paid to do their work. One of the things that embracing all these formats has done for me, unintentionally, but now now that I know it happens, it just makes me do it even more, is that I get approached for projects because people know that, because part of my reputation now has become this person who shoots lots of different formats and knows a lot about the cameras as well, which has nothing to do with photography almost, and yet everything to do with my photography. So, shooting peel apart Polaroid when I can, as long as it exists, in addition to the integral film and shooting iPhone, all within one project. The people who are there know it. The output, people from Impossible Project publish my material every once in a while, so there's an audience that I wouldn't get access to if I wasn't shooting Polaroid. And this kind of multi-dimensional aspect to it is just, this is another iPhone shot, by the way, too. It broadens my appreciation of photography, but the external impact, the fact that people are now coming to me because I shoot more than one thing, is something that I didn't expect. And this is one of the patterns in my life, I think, is that when you just throw yourself at things and you're open to the fact that you don't know what decision you make will have a particular effect. And this is the interesting thing. In hindsight, it's very easy to say, oh, well, the reason I got recognized for this, the reason I won this award, or the reason I got published here was because I did X. But you didn't know that was going to happen. If you hadn't done X, it probably wouldn't have happened at that particular time where everything kind of aligns in that right way. And everything that I've done, whether it's design or music or photography, has had that same pattern where the thing I've tried many, 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 many more things that I have not got any recognition for or that have been complete failures. But because I try so many things, the percentage of things that are some form of success, whether it's a success in the output and it's a personal success, I like the outcome, or it's some sort of commercial positive result, or recognition, whatever it happens to be, that happens more frequently because I'm putting my fingers in more pies. And that's the opposite of conventional wisdom, which says you have to pick one thing and focus on it and get better and better and better at it. Things like the 10,000-hour principle, which is fairly true, that you can't become an expert at something unless you've done it for long enough. But that should always come with an asterisk that says, but you don't just have to do that one thing. You can put those 10,000 hours in, and actually you'll be better off, you'll be more well-rounded if you also do this thing and that thing, and you're constantly on the lookout for something that'll lift the rest of your knowledge base. So to kind of start wrapping up a little bit, and if anyone has questions, do just interject them. You don't have to wait until the end. I did want to talk a little bit about the idea of workflow. So, I keep forgetting this is going to fall over on me, and I just want to lean on it, clearly. I'm not trying to destroy it. Does anyone not shoot film in this little group? It's just you, just film only. Okay, so everyone shoots film. How many of you digitize let's see, not how many of you do. How many of you don't do anything digital with your film? Like no scanning or anything. You just shoot, okay, but everyone else does. How many of you publish what you shoot on film online somewhere? How many of you do? Okay, wait, so there's an interesting cross-section here. So there are a lot of people who are doing something digital with their film, but they're not publishing it? How many of you are not publishing any of your film images, but you are kind of scanning them? How many of you didn't understand the question in the middle, and that's why you didn't raise your hand? How many of you are uncomfortable with raising your hands in public? There we go. That always gets someone. Well, because I find, I met someone just yesterday after my talk on the main stage that he came up to me. That talk was about Instagram, more specifically. And he's early 20s, shooting primarily film, beautiful work too. But he's posting to Instagram, and he was just asking me, does it make sense for me to be using film on Instagram, or should I just go digital? And it was I understand where that question comes from, because the output being digital, he just thought there would be, the idea is digital workflow is easier. And it is, to a certain extent. The format is already there. You don't have to do any conversion or anything else. But I've had other questions over the last few years from people who don't shoot film because they think it's hard, or because their output is digital, they think that it just makes sense to shoot digital because you're one step closer to the output. And to me, at least, that's confusing. So none of you might actually have a problem with any of this. And again, because I didn't know what the audience was, I kind of guessed a little bit on this last bit to talk about. Because at least I like learning from how other people do things. I'm not very prescriptive when it comes to teaching. I don't say, you need to do it this way. The most I can ever say is, this is what I've done. Hopefully you can learn from this. This is what works for me, and this is what hasn't worked for me. But one of the things that I love now about this modern age is that, and if you forget for a moment that this is a camera, what this really is just a computer. It's a fantastic thing. I mean, we have computers everywhere, but we're getting to the point where there's a lot of stuff that's possible very, very easily if you build your workflow correctly. So, for instance, my film workflow, I've tried developing. I was curious, but I didn't like it because I didn't trust myself, and I want a really good end result. And I would jump off a bridge if I developed some good shots and I ruined them. So I give that to someone else. I have a lab in Derby, the UK Film Lab. They are fantastic, and I just trust them as a pro lab. So I send them all my stuff. I shoot and I send them, whether it's personal or client stuff. They do brilliant scanning work, email me the results. There's no kind of physical process after that. And then everything gets dumped into Lightroom. But what I love on that the film side of things is that Lightroom Mobile, have any of you played with this? If you shoot film and you publish it a lot, it actually kind of is a great shortcut to, especially for things like if you publish it to, whether it's Instagram or IM or any platform where the main method of interacting with that platform is through one of these devices. Sometimes that can actually be a stumbling block for people in their workflow, is that if it's here, but you can't how do you get it to here easily? So not everyone uses Lightroom. There's no requirement to it, right? But you can sync your catalog or subsets of your catalog, basically, from Lightroom to Lightroom Mobile. And what that means is that I have all of my kind of film shots from the last couple of years, at least, that I've synced on here. And I can do minor edits on them without having to pull my laptop out. I can do stuff on my iPad as well. It's little improvements like that have basically are removing any difference fundamentally. Once your film is in digital form, there's no difference in your process for getting it out to the public or doing anything with it, really. Again, this might not apply to any of you, because if you've already figured out a good workflow, then that's good. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned it. So to wrap this all up somehow, the experience for me of now 8 years worth of taking photography seriously and 5 years of Instagram, which led me to shooting every day, which I still do not do with any other camera because it's kind of ridiculous. There's no cost in any way, not even kind of time cost to doing it on this, or even storage cost. It's just there. The practice that I've been able to get from not ruling anything out, from kind of embracing every format that I can get my hands on, the improvements that I've seen in my digital photography because of how much time I've spent with film photography, the better understanding that I have of light and the physics of photography because of shooting large format. All of these things don't just inform the particular format that they apply to when I learn them. They all fold back into everything. And the purpose, basically, of this session is to try and encourage all of you to, rather than close yourself off to something, embrace it just for the hell of embracing it, especially if it's photography, right? If you love photography, if you love shooting, if you love capturing things that you see, and especially if you love sharing those with other people, try, experiment. Especially if you're a large format shooter and you haven't experimented with what you can pull off on this, try it. You might become better than everyone else because your understanding of physics and light and composition is better than people who might only shoot with something like this. If you shoot, like my buddy Chris in the back there, if you shoot with a lot of light, this man knows how to paint with light. Shoots lovely portraits and mostly works with models. And the unnecessarily good avatar, the headshot that I have that's somewhere on the wall and that was up here, is shot by that guy. And I have no idea. It doesn't even look like me. It's like some false future, hyper-realistic version. But I keep hammering away at him to do the work he does with light on this. Why? To push himself, but also because there might be no one in the world, by comparison, who's doing work with models with light on a smartphone. And that might sound like not a big deal, but people get recognized for doing something that's unique. And that's the last thought I want to plant in your head here, is that one of the things I've discovered over 20 plus years from design to photography, experimenting with things that are bleeding edge, that are so new that most people who are established don't want to try them because it's too risky, or just experimenting with something that I have no reason to think might work, but I'd like to do it because no one else is doing it. Most of the things that have gotten me some sort of attention, whether it's professionally or personally in that way, fall into that category. They're the things that I've tried that, because no one else is doing them, and I've tried them with earnest, and I've succeeded at doing something good with them, somehow, suddenly that becomes the thing that, oh, you're the best at that. And then you get attention for it. And it's a magnificent thing. So between that and the learning that comes from it, there's no kind of nice bow, actually. It's just try, because that's where the fun is. And I'll leave you with that rather than rambling anymore. And hopefully any of you have any questions or anything. I'm just going to stand here trying not to make the lectern fall over. But thank you very much for your time. Yes, of course. If you ask it, I will actually repeat it, so if anyone is hanging around, they can hear.
If you're using your smartphone
yes.
for photography, how you can, let's say that you take a beautiful picture and your client will be absolutely happy to use that photo. How you can use that photo on, let's say, big format?
Okay, so
They want to print off that.
so the question there is, well, so this is an interesting one. Like the question is, if you've shot for a client on a smartphone, something, it's low resolution. I mean, now this is 12 megapixel, but it's not just all about the megapixels with digital, right? It's also about the sensor size and the optics and everything else. It's multi-layered. What if they want to print, something massive on it? Printing, well, so this is interesting for me. Because I come from a print design background originally, I know a lot about print. For a year, I was actually even the creative director of Moo. A lot of you might have their business cards from moo.com. I've worked with print for over 20 years. And resolution is a curious thing because it's not an absolute. It depends on so many different factors, including viewing distance, including paper, including what printer it is and what even the inks that are being used. I mean, there's so many different factors that play into what that end result is going to look like. You can get a fairly poor large print from a large format negative if something in the chain isn't done right, which the people who have printed large format are nodding at. Similarly, you can get amazing prints from even the previous, the 8 megapixel images that the previous lines of iPhones and other things created. You can print those at a fairly decent size if you know how to either how to just like if you're printing if you're doing a C-type print, for instance, C-type prints are very forgiving. They're actually fairly low resolution, as opposed to an inkjet, a giclée, or something like that, which is really high resolution. So you're going to see pixels if you print large on a printer that is very unforgiving. If you print large on photo paper, you can get away with a little bit more. If your image is meant to be viewed as a poster like this from a distance, you can get away with more. If it's going to be viewed up close in a gallery, you can get away with less. But I've also seen people. I've worked every once in a while with the folks at Metro Imaging in London, and they are just masters at making things do things they shouldn't do. What was one of the examples they showed? They showed me an example once where they'd taken a 5 megapixel smartphone image and printed it at, I think it was just maybe 20 by 24, but that's too big for 5 megapixels. But one of their retouchers had spent about half an hour in Photoshop, which isn't a ton of time, but it was a ton of time for what he did, increasing the resolution of it and adding noise and doing all sorts of filtering and processing to decrease the artifacts, the digital artifacts, from the increasing of the resolution, from the upscaling, to the point where he knew what the threshold was of the printing process they were going to use. And he said, if I can get those visual artifacts down past a certain point, they won't be seen when you have the output. And he showed me the print, and there's no way that I would have guessed that it was printed. It was printed from an original that was shot on a smartphone at 5 megapixels, right? So the answer, like with a lot of things, is it depends. But it's why I've never had a fear either of, well, so there are lots of other reasons, right? When I've gone on projects and I take this alongside a 35 millimeter digital and a medium format film camera, for instance, I treat this as one of the cameras that I have, because sometimes I might not have my other cameras ready to kind of take a picture immediately, and the only reason I got a shot is because of this. The number of times that's happened in the last few years is enough that I will always have this ready to go, and it is one of my cameras. Because what's more important to me is getting the shot somehow. And sometimes that's even been the case with a landscape, because the light's moving and I don't have enough time to actually set up a tripod and a bigger camera. And I see there's a gap in the clouds, and I know a lot of you do landscape work, and you know how that is. Sometimes you just see the light moving, and you're like, oh my God, it's going to be there, and I don't okay. And I just set myself up, and I get the shot. And sure, maybe I won't be able to print that at 6 foot wide for close gallery inspection, but that's not my primary output, and I'm okay with that, because I can use that digitally anywhere, and I can actually get the size prints that I would want to get or want to sell or want to give away as well, without feeling like I've compromised in quality at all. Now, the extension of that too is that it also depends on what you're looking for as your output. And it's why I like embracing everything, because it also teaches me what's possible and what's not. What I like to say a lot about any camera, but it's what I teach a lot with these, is that it's not a crappy camera, it's just good at some things and bad at others, which is true for any camera, any film type, any lens, right? There is no one perfect camera that can do anything. So the trick with photography on the technical side is learning the ins and outs of your equipment to such an extent that you know exactly what it's good at and what it's not, and then you can start to forget the camera and its settings and everything else, and you start to recognize when the conditions are right to take that picture. And it's the same with printing and with the output of things. Clyde Butcher, how many of you are familiar with his landscape work? He's an American landscape photographer. I saw him speak. He's from Florida. Well, he's not from Florida. He lives in Florida now. I saw him speak a week and a half ago in Miami, and he's a master printer. He up until a few years ago, he was only shooting large format film and doing all his own printing and enlarging, and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work, insanely good. But he can't. He's 74 now, and he can't carry 60 pounds worth of camera equipment on his back. I don't blame him. I don't want to do that now. And so he's not doing the same printing anymore. He's still selling prints, but they have to be inkjet prints. He's shooting on Sony A7s. But instead of, he knows probably better than anyone how big a change that is in both the format he's capturing on and the output capability. He can't get those deep blacks on an inkjet printer that he could using a traditional method. But he doesn't care because it means he can keep shooting rather than giving up shooting. And it also means there was a picture that his wife took of him on a beach with a lovely piece of driftwood, massive driftwood, somewhere in the Florida Keys. And he's 74, right? And he looks like Father Christmas. He's just a massive guy with a big white beard. He's laying down like this under this piece of driftwood with his A7. And he showed the picture that he got, and it's just this gorgeous, gorgeous image. And as he's talking about it, he's getting so excited because he's saying, there are people where he said, yeah, I've given up shooting my film and everything else. And you could tell the audience was kind of deflated slightly because oh. And he's excited because he's like, I could never have gotten this, not even on 5.4. Like, the camera wouldn't have fit there. And that's kind of the idea, right? If you want to be printing massive prints at very high quality, work backwards from there and shoot with something that's going to support that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just knowing that one of the things this might not be great at is that, if that's your purpose, your intent of the end result. And when I have a client brief, like that American Express project, right, I knew from the beginning that it was going to be an exhibition that they were putting on as well in London. So I knew it was going to be, they were used for press, which was going to be online and in some newspapers. Well, that's all low res, no questions there. But the print, I didn't choose what I was going to shoot on before I'd spoken with the printers and knew exactly confirmed what size print we were going to get and how they were going to be printed as well. And because of that, I knew that I could get away with the A7S with 12 megapixels, and I knew that I had a little bit of crop room because I'd done the math, and I understood what my output was going to be. So 12 megapixels on that A7S is the same as the iPhone 6S, right? It's not high resolution, but it was high enough resolution for the output. And I forget what they printed at. I think they printed it 16 by 20, which isn't massive, but it's big enough. And it was in a gallery space where people are going to be this far away from it. And they were fine. They were sharp and crisp. And because of that, I didn't have to bring lights. I didn't have to do anything else. I could shoot in miserable conditions, really. We were shooting inside shops in October all throughout the UK. Sometimes right around sunset, sometimes at morning, sometimes it was raining outside. There was nothing consistent about it. But because I could shoot at ISO 12,800 without question, because the A7S is good at it, and there's not a lot of noise in that end result, essentially it was like, know what your output's going to be, and you can work back from there. And I only know this because I throw myself at all these different methods of capturing, because what I love is capturing stuff. And if I can't capture it with this, I want to capture it with something else. If I can't capture it on film, I want to find a digital camera that can capture it. I shoot a lot of film because I like the output better than I like the digital, but it's also because I'm lazy and I don't want to spend 3 days editing a shoot in Lightroom and Photoshop when I could have just sent everything off to my ProLab and got it back and been happy with it. But I only get to make those choices because I keep trying. Yeah. What film stocks do I like using? At the moment, I'm shooting as much Fuji 400H as I can because I'm expecting they're going to discontinue that soon, too. It's pretty gorgeous, but I'm also a fan of Portrait 400 and 160 on the color stocks, and Ektar in the right conditions. Again, even film stocks is kind of that thing. When is it right and when is it not? I'm about to start experimenting with the Cinestill stuff, which I have no idea. Cheers. I don't know if it's going to be good or not. I want to shoot more black and white. I'm finding I'm shooting more black and white in large formats because it's cheaper in sheet film than it is in other. It doesn't fit for me in 35 mil for some reason. But this is another thing that I love. By experimenting, I'm finding all sorts of things out about me that I wouldn't otherwise. There are things that I shoot now that the only reason I know that the subject matter works is because I switched to a different camera and I tried a film stock that I hadn't before, and suddenly I got a result that I hadn't got before. And it's because of all of those different elements. So again, like 810 or 10.8, I'm primarily doing impossible film. I will be doing sheet film this summer for that project, but for me, I almost look at that camera as a large instant camera. And I'm fine with that because it means when I shift into a different mode of thinking and planning, and the kind of shoots that I'm likely to do with it will be different because the film's different, but also because I'm going to process it right away, and it changes the pace. I haven't met a film stock I didn't like. That's for true. That's for sure. That black and white square image from Iceland was actually shot on very, very, very expired Fomapan. Like so expired that the emulsion was scratched when it came out of the camera, and I had to do a lot of scratch retouching on it. But the results were just, the tones. Yeah. So, anyone else? I will be hanging around. It's not like I'm disappearing. So if you don't like asking questions in public too, just catch me afterwards. Yes?
Talk about the size of output from...
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
There is the Apple Gallery, remember?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that was just a point about the size of output. Yeah, the Apple Gallery, they blow things up onto... I guarantee you, if you look at any of the billboards that Apple produced that were out for that World Gallery, if you look at them really up close, they're going to look miserable. Because not only did they they upscaled everything, because the first version of those were just 8 megapixel images, but they're meant to be seen from like 60 feet away. Yeah, billboards you can do if you have an image, you print it at 72 dpi, and no one will know the difference because our eyes fill in the gaps and the distance fills in the rest. But there's a I don't know. You also don't have to use everything you shoot, right? One of the things I like best about these is just the practice. It's almost like when if I do location scouting, I only take this because I don't need to actually. I'm not shooting anything. I'm just capturing things. But when I do it now, because I've become so well versed with using this as a camera rather than just taking reference shots, what I do is I actually compose images, and I do quick edits on them as well. So I'm not just doing location scouting. I'm kind of doing a proof of the entire shoot. And I'll well, it's all right to say this because this isn't being recorded. Oh, they wouldn't care anyway, right? Clients don't care about the output as long as it's what they want, and that's the great thing. I never tell people that they might get an iPhone shot, because if I did, they'd go, oh no, that's because they don't understand, right? The clients and the agencies have no idea what they're doing. They just think they do, and they want to act like they do. So I did a shoot in. Actually, it was the last time I was in Birmingham. I was in Birmingham in January for Land Rover. And it was a really weird brief. It was as part of a bigger campaign, and they wanted me to shoot at sunset, an urban sunset, and it was Birmingham because Land Rover's nearby, so they wanted Birmingham as the place. Well, it's not a place I would pick for a sunset shoot. They wanted it urban, so it wasn't like outskirts of Birmingham. It's like they wanted buildings, and I'm like, everything's under construction in Birmingham. There's nothing terribly attractive you can get, and I was just thinking, oh my God, what am I going to get? And there's not a guarantee of a sunset. In January, or possibly, there certainly isn't now. You can guarantee gray, and so it was one day. So you have one shot at doing it. The brief included billboards, so they were really, really worried about resolution of output. Some of it was going to be digital, but they were going to be doing billboards, and that's what they had, billboards. It was through M&C Saatchi, so one of the first questions they asked was like, oh, what camera are you going to be using? Because we want to make sure it's high res enough. And I was like, all right, I'll shoot it on the Sony. It's fine. It's 42 megapixels. Go away. You don't have to worry about resolution. I show up at 11 a.m. to do a scout of my locations, and the light was actually really, really good. Like ridiculously good. Had some clouds, had blue sky. There was the sun was bouncing off buildings because it was so low. It could have been mistaken for a sunset. And I'm taking my reference shots with this. I've left the bag, all my equipment somewhere, and I'm just lining up the shots that I'm going to be shooting on a wide-angle lens anyway. So this is actually a pretty good approximation. And when it comes time for the sunset, one of my locations. Instead of having some nice patchy clouds and like a little bit of blue and some interesting stuff, the light just was flat and not reflecting. It just wasn't any good for that. And I had 3 locations I needed to shoot in an hour because that was the sunset window, right? And so of the 3 images that I delivered to them, 2 were shot on the A7R2, the other one was shot on this. Because as it turned out, those billboards were digital billboards. So I got the shot I needed, but then after the fact, before I delivered anything, I said, so could you let me know the resolution of the billboards? They didn't need to know why. I just said, could you let me know? And then they came back to me and they're like, oh yeah, we thought we were going to be print, but they're all digital. Do you know what the resolution of digital billboards are? Smaller than the original iPhone. It's like 180 pixels wide by like 200 and something pixels tall. It's ridiculous. So every use that they needed, you could have shot on a 110 camera and scanned it, and it would have been fine, right? And they didn't know. The end result was what was important. The picture was what was important. And this is the kind of thing for me, because I use this now, even when I'm using it for reference shots, and I'm planning to shoot something on something else. I'm treating it as a real camera, and I'm taking a real shot. And sometimes, like in that situation, that saved my ass a little bit. And it's only because of being flexible and being open to all possibilities. I know that we've got another talk that needs to come up here, and I can... Well, oh, yeah, I just see you standing there. I thought you were... Oh, okay. Oh, fine. I'm happy to stand here. Any other questions? Or feel free to just, buy me a coffee, and I'll keep talking. Nope. Okay. Well, let's clear out the space and let you. There's lots of other stuff to see, so no need to sit here awkwardly. You may leave. Thank you again. My pleasure.